Most people think avoidant attachment means someone doesn't care, that they're cold, detached, emotionally unavailable by choice. But what if the truth is the opposite? What if avoidant people feel too much so much that closeness feels unsafe instead of comforting? What if pulling away isn't rejection but protection? Today, we're breaking the biggest myths about avoidant attachment. Because misunderstanding it is destroying relationships that never had to end. Avoidant attachment is often misunderstood as emotional coldness or indifference, but in reality it is rooted in self-protection rather than a lack of emotion. People with avoidant attachment styles usually feel deeply. They simply learned, often very early in life, that expressing those feelings or relying on others was unsafe. When emotional needs were ignored, minimized, or punished, the nervous system adapted by shutting down outward dependency. What looks like distance in adulthood is actually a carefully built defense designed to prevent pain. At the core of avoidant attachment is the belief that closeness leads to loss of autonomy, loss of control, or loss of emotional safety. These individuals often grew up in environments where caregivers were emotionally unavailable, unpredictable, or dismissive. As children, they learned that needing comfort would not bring relief, so they stopped asking for it. Over time, independence became a survival skill, and emotional self-sufficiency became a source of pride. This doesn't mean emotions disappeared. It means emotions were buried where they felt safer. Avoidant individuals often experience strong emotions internally, but they struggle to access or express them in real time. When intimacy increases, their nervous system may interpret it as danger rather than connection. The body responds with stress signals, tightness, irritation, the urge to withdraw, even when the mind knows the relationship matters. Pulling away, becoming distant, or shutting down emotionally is not a conscious rejection of the other person. It is an instinctive attempt to regulate overwhelming feelings. This is why avoidant attachment can be so confusing to partners. One moment, the avoidant person may appear engaged, caring, and affectionate. The next, they seem detached or unavailable. This shift often happens not because their feelings changed, but because closeness crossed an internal threshold. Emotional intensity triggers old memories of vulnerability without support, and distance becomes the quickest way to feel safe again. Another misconception is that avoidant people do not value relationships. Many deeply desire love, stability, and connection, but they fear the cost of needing someone. Dependence feels like weakness to them because they learned that relying on others led to disappointment. As a result, they may downplay their needs, avoid difficult emotional conversations, or convince themselves they are better off alone, even when loneliness quietly persists beneath the surface. Avoidant attachment is also about control. Emotional self-reliance gives a sense of predictability in a world that once felt uncertain. If you do not need anyone, no one can hurt you. This belief creates a protective wall, but it also limits intimacy. Vulnerability requires the willingness to be affected by another person, and for avoidant individuals, that can feel like stepping into emotional chaos rather than love. Importantly, avoidant attachment is not a character flaw or a sign of emotional deficiency. It is an adaptive response to early experiences. The strategies that once protected a child from emotional pain can become barriers in adult relationships that require openness and mutual support. What once ensured survival now restricts connection. Healing avoidant attachment does not come from being pushed, criticized, or forced to open up. It comes from safety, patience, and consistent experiences of being accepted without losing autonomy. When avoidant individuals learn that they can express needs without being overwhelmed or controlled, their defenses slowly soften. They begin to realize that closeness does not have to mean danger, and vulnerability does not have to result in abandonment. Ultimately, avoidant attachment is about preserving emotional safety, not rejecting love. Beneath the distance is often a deeply feeling person who learned to protect themselves the only way they knew how. Understanding this truth allows for compassion, clearer boundaries, and healthier connections both with others and with oneself. Avoidant people do want love, even though their behavior often suggests otherwise. Beneath the distance, the silence, and the emotional restraint is a genuine desire for connection, intimacy, and understanding. What stands in the way is not a lack of feeling, but a deep fear that loving someone will cost them their independence, identity, or sense of control. For avoidant individuals, closeness can feel less like comfort and more like a threat to the self. This fear usually develops early in life. Many avoidant people grew up in environments where emotional closeness was inconsistent, overwhelming, or conditional. Love may have come with expectations, criticism, or pressure to meet someone else's needs at the expense of their own. As a result, they learned that staying emotionally separate was the safest way to exist. Autonomy became synonymous with safety, and dependence became associated with vulnerability and loss. As adults, avoidant individuals often equate intimacy with being consumed or restricted. They may worry that once they let someone in, they will be expected to change, sacrifice themselves, or constantly meet emotional demands they don't know how to fulfill. This fear isn't always conscious, but it shows up in subtle ways, pulling back when a relationship deepens, feeling irritated by emotional conversations, or craving space right when closeness is offered. Despite this, avoidant people often fall in love deeply. They can feel excitement, affection, and attachment just like anyone else. The difference is what happens when that attachment begins to require emotional exposure. Love activates their nervous system in conflicting ways. Part of them wants closeness, while another part is scanning for signs of entrapment. This inner conflict can be exhausting, leading them to distance themselves not because they stopped caring, but because caring feels overwhelming. One of the biggest fears for avoidant individuals is losing their sense of self. They often pride themselves on being self-sufficient and capable. Relationships that require emotional interdependence can feel like a threat to that identity. They may fear becoming dependent, needy, or weak, qualities they were taught to avoid at all costs. To protect their self-image, they minimize needs, suppress emotions, and prioritize independence, even when it leads to emotional isolation. Avoidant people may also struggle to ask for support, even when they desperately need it. Dependence feels uncomfortable because it creates a power imbalance they don't trust. Relying on someone means giving them the ability to disappoint or hurt them, and avoidant individuals would rather endure alone than risk that vulnerability. This can make them appear distant or unreachable, when in reality they are guarding something fragile inside. Another misunderstanding is that avoidant people prefer casual or shallow relationships. While some may choose emotional distance as a coping strategy, many long for deep, meaningful bonds. The problem is not depth itself, but the fear that depth will erase boundaries and individuality. They want love that allows them to remain whole, not love that demands self-abandonment. Healing for avoidant individuals begins when they learn that dependence does not mean disappearance. Healthy relationships are not about losing oneself, but about being seen and supported as one's full self. When autonomy is respected and emotional connection is offered without pressure, avoidant people slowly learn that intimacy can coexist with independence. Avoidant people do want love. They want to be chosen, understood, and accepted. What they fear is not commitment, but the belief that love will require them to give up who they are. When that fear is addressed with patience, safety, and clear boundaries, their capacity for connection can finally emerge without feeling like a threat. Distance in avoidant attachment is often mistaken for manipulation, disinterest, or emotional games, but in truth, it is a learned survival strategy. Avoidant individuals are not pulling away to punish, control, or confuse others. They are responding to an internal alarm system that was shaped long before their current relationship ever existed. What looks like intentional withdrawal is usually an automatic reaction rooted in self-preservation. For many avoidant people, emotional closeness once came with pain, rejection, or overwhelm. In childhood or early relationships, reaching out may have resulted in being ignored, criticized, or made to feel like a burden. Over time, the nervous system learned a powerful association. Closeness equals danger. Distance, on the other hand, brought relief. It created space to breathe, think, and regain emotional balance. That pattern didn't disappear with age. It simply adapted to adult relationships. This is why avoidant individuals often withdraw right when a relationship becomes more meaningful. Increased intimacy can activate old fears of losing control or being emotionally exposed without support. Their body responds before their conscious mind has time to analyze what's happening. They may feel sudden discomfort, irritation, numbness, or an urgent need for space. Creating distance becomes the fastest way to calm their nervous system, not a calculated move to influence the other person's behavior. People often label this behavior as manipulation because it creates anxiety in partners. Silence, emotional shutdowns, or pulling away can feel confusing and hurtful, especially for someone who values closeness. But manipulation requires intent. Most avoidant individuals are not trying to provoke a reaction or gain power. In fact, many are unaware of how deeply their withdrawal affects others. Their focus is on reducing their own internal distress, not controlling the relationship. Distance is also how avoidant people maintain a sense of safety and autonomy. Emotional closeness can feel engulfing, as though they are being absorbed into someone else's needs or expectations. Creating space helps them reconnect with themselves and restore a feeling of independence. This doesn't mean they don't care. It means their sense of self feels threatened when emotional boundaries blur. Another reason distance becomes a default response is emotional overload. Avoidant individuals often struggle to process emotions in real time. When conversations become intense or vulnerable, they may feel flooded and unsure how to respond. Rather than risk saying the wrong thing or exposing feelings they don't fully understand, they retreat. Silence feels safer than emotional expression that could lead to conflict or disappointment. It's important to understand that this survival strategy once served a purpose. It helped the avoidant individual cope in environments where emotional support was unreliable or unsafe. Distance reduced exposure to pain. However, what once protected them can become harmful in adult relationships that require communication, presence, and mutual reassurance. The strategy persists not because it works well, but because it is familiar. Healing begins when distance is understood rather than demonized. This does not mean accepting hurtful behavior or abandoning boundaries. It means recognizing that withdrawal is a signal, not a scheme. Avoidant individuals benefit from learning new ways to regulate emotions without disappearing. Partners benefit from responding with clarity instead of chasing or assuming malicious intent. Distance stops being the only option when avoidant people experience consistent emotional safety. When they learn that closeness does not automatically lead to loss, criticism, or control, their nervous system slowly adapts. Space becomes a choice instead of a reflex. Ultimately, distance in avoidant attachment is not manipulation, it is protection. Understanding this distinction creates room for accountability without blame and connection without fear. Avoidant attachment can change, but not through pressure, ultimatums, or emotional force. In fact, the more an avoidant person is pushed to open up, explain themselves, or be more available, the more their defenses tend to activate. Change for avoidant attachment happens through safety, not demand. It happens when the nervous system learns, slowly and consistently, that closeness does not equal danger. Avoidant attachment develops as a response to environments where emotional needs were not safely met. Many avoidant individuals learned early that relying on others led to disappointment, intrusion, or emotional overwhelm. As a result, they built internal systems to stay regulated on their own. Independence became a shield, and emotional distance became a way to stay in control. When pressure appears in adult relationships, it mirrors the very experiences that taught them to withdraw in the first place. Pressure often shows up as chasing, repeated emotional confrontations, guilt, or ultimatums. While these behaviors usually come from a desire for reassurance, they unintentionally reinforce the avoidant belief that closeness comes with loss of autonomy. The avoidant nervous system interprets pressure as a threat. Even loving requests can feel like demands, triggering shutdown, defensiveness, or withdrawal. The more pressure is applied, the more the avoidant individual feels the need to protect themselves. Safety, on the other hand, creates a completely different internal response. Safety looks like consistency without control, emotional openness without expectation, and boundaries that are clear but not punitive. It allows avoidant individuals to remain connected without feeling trapped. When they experience relationships where they are not punished for needing space or criticized for their pace, their defenses slowly begin to relax. Change happens when avoidant individuals feel accepted as they are, rather than constantly evaluated for how much closeness they provide. Feeling emotionally safe does not mean there are no boundaries or needs expressed. It means those needs are communicated calmly and respectfully, without threats of abandonment or attempts to force vulnerability. This environment allows avoidant people to explore connection at a tolerable pace. Another key element of safety is predictability. Avoidant attachment thrives on control because unpredictability once felt dangerous. When partners are emotionally consistent, responding in stable, non-reactive ways, the avoidant nervous system starts to trust. Over time, closeness stops feeling like chaos and begins to feel manageable. Small moments of vulnerability become possible because they no longer come with emotional consequences. It's also important to recognize that healing avoidant attachment is an internal process. No partner can fix someone else's attachment style. Avoidant individuals must choose to become aware of their patterns and develop new ways to self-regulate. However, a safe relational environment makes that work possible. Safety creates the conditions where self-reflection doesn't feel threatening and growth doesn't feel like surrender. When avoidant individuals feel safe, they begin to test closeness in small ways, sharing a thought, staying present during discomfort, or expressing a need. These moments are significant even if they seem minor from the outside. Each safe experience rewires the belief that vulnerability leads to harm. Avoidant attachment does not change through force because force confirms fear. It changes through repeated experiences of being respected, understood, and allowed to exist without losing autonomy. Safety teaches the nervous system that connection and independence can coexist. Ultimately, avoidant attachment can soften and transform, but only in environments where love does not feel like a demand. When safety replaces pressure, distance no longer needs to be the default, and genuine connection can finally take root.